Okay, this is about using studies wisely, and it is the last lesson in our learning target. So we're going to be talking about the scope of inference and evaluating based on ethics. This is a topic that we'll discuss in class, but ethics does not appear on the AP test. So what kind of inference can we make from a study? It depends on the design of the study. So you'll notice that this is set up like a little matrix here, and along the left-hand side we have where individuals randomly selected. So usually when we do a survey, we do randomly select individuals, and so that would mainly pertain to them. We don't usually do that in an experiment because we can't randomly select individuals from a population normally in an experiment. For example, if our experiment was to determine the effect of a drug on cancer treatment, well, we can't use the whole cancer population. We have to use the specific people that we have that are eligible for our particular study. So most usually experimental subjects are not randomly selected. Not that they couldn't be. But going on an observational study, then we would say that yes, they're randomly selected. So what does that mean? When they're randomly selected, then we can make an inference about the population based on that. And you'll notice that it continues over here, okay? But if the individuals were not randomly selected, then we cannot make an inference about the population, okay? All right, then what about what's at the top here? Were individuals randomly assigned to groups? Well, in experiments, we usually randomly assign individuals to groups. We have a control group and an experimental group, or we have two experimental groups, sometimes even multiple groups. In that case, we can infer cause and effect because we've had more than one group and we can compare them, so we can determine cause and effect. As a matter of fact, if we can't determine cause and effect, then it was a poorly designed experiment, because that's the whole purpose. So, cause and effect, yes, when the individuals are randomly assigned to groups, and we see that on this side, and we see no when there's not random group assignments. So the only case that we can make an inference about the population and an inference about cause and effect, both, is if both the individuals were randomly selected and the individuals were randomly assigned to groups. So do notice down here, it's very important, this sentence, well-designed experiments randomly assign individuals to treatment groups, okay? Usually, as it says, we are not selecting experiments for individuals for an experiment from a larger population, though. And opposite with observational studies. So again, this first sentence is very important. A well-designed experiment tells us that changes in the explanatory variable cause changes in the response variable. If they don't, it's not a well-designed experiment because we can't determine cause and effect then. Another problem that we can have that would affect causation is lack of realism. If the experiment is conducted in such a place or in such a way that is so far removed from what happens in real life, things don't happen in a bubble, that, you might say, well, that might work in a lab, but it would never work that way in real life. So that can be a problem with conclusions. And then we come to the ethics and the practicality of an experiment. So looking at these three questions asked here, these are just three possible scenarios. If you had the question, does texting while driving increase the risk of having an accident? Well, we are not actually going to put people in a car and put them on the highway and hand them a phone and say text and let's see what happens. That could be very dangerous, both to them and the other people on the road, okay? So that would definitely not be ethical and perhaps not practical. It could get really expensive with medical costs and car accidents. Does going to church regularly help people live longer? Well, it would not be ethical to tell people you have to go to church if that person wasn't spiritually inclined to do that. And it would also not be practical to have people that wish to worship not go to church in order to do the study. So there's an ethical situation. And then finally the question, does smoking cause lung cancer? Well, we can't randomly select people and force some people to smoke over a long period of time and tell other people then that you can't smoke if they're so inclined to do that. It could, again, it could affect their long-term health in different ways. It could affect their mental health if they're already addicted to smoking. So sometimes it is possible to build a strong case for causation even if it's not an experiment, if it is from an experiment or an observational study. But criteria still have to be met. First of all, the association has to be very strong. It has to be observed that, man, there is a definite link between, and we've noticed this, that between, for example, people that smoke and people that get lung cancer, it's just a very strong association. And then finally, that association is consistent. It's like not just in one place or not just at one time. If it was just at one geographic location, then there could very well be a different cause for the lung cancer. But if it's, in all around the world, which it is, then obviously it's consistent over place. And if it's consistent over time, well, ever since the association was determined, they've been able to see that it's remained consistent. And then finally, the more and more data they get, the more and more observations they make, the stronger and stronger the correlation becomes. So more equals more. And then it precedes the effect in time. That means that even before we made the association, before we made the link, we can look back in history and we can see that the link was already there. We know that tobacco first became popular in Europe, for example, after it was discovered growing here in the quote-unquote New World, and they took it back with them to Europe. Well, men started smoking there, and we see the increase then of lung cancer at that time in history. Later, women began to smoke, and then we could see the increase of lung cancer in women based on that history. So, precedes the effect in time. And then finally, is it plausible? Does it make sense that smoking could lead to lung cancer? And of course it does. Okay, so the ethics of data collection. We know that collecting data can at times be physically harmful to individuals. It could be mentally harmful to individuals. It could be emotionally harmful to individuals. And so therefore ethical questions arise. So there are a few things that we do in order to help protect against these ethical questions. One is that any study has to be approved in advance by an institutional review board. So different institutions do research. There are psychological institutions that do psychological research. There are medical institutions like hospitals and universities that do medical research. There are sociological places that do research. So all of these places have a review board made up of people from across the industry that look at proposed studies and determine, have safety measures been put in place. So they're not looking at, does this look like a good study, or does it look like even a well-planned study, but instead they're just looking at, is this potentially harmful to the individuals that are involved? And then have the individuals who are the subjects given informed consent. So the people who are the subjects of the study must know in advance, what are the possible outcomes of this? What are the possible harms to them, whether it be physical or mental or emotional, and also time. How much time is it going to take? Is there a physical requirement? Do they have to go somewhere and be there for a length of time? All those things have to be told to the subjects in advance, and then they have to agree to those things, and they have to agree in writing. And then finally, all of the data that is collected has to be confidential. This is about people. This affects their lives. And so very commonly the data is kept, the records of it are kept under numbers. So subject number 37 might be referred to in the results of the study, but somewhere on record would be the name of those individuals. And so don't confuse this with being a study that's anonymous. It's not anonymous, it's just confidential. It's important that we have the names of the individual. It may be that the researchers have to go back to those people at a later time and tell them further ramifications of what they've determined, or they may have to have them confirm that certain things were done at the time of the study. So we talked about the scope of inference. Go back and make sure you study that again, read about it in the book, and then we talked a little bit about the ethics of statistics. And as I said, ethics will not be on the test, but the other part will be. Okay, end of this one.